Hey guys, happy Tuesday. We just saw each other in live science class, so now this is your live history class, if you would. We're going to continue our studies of the 1920s. Since a lot of you do not have your Bible book, and I get it because you didn't want to carry them because they're easily to get messed up. We're just going to do history this week, and then we'll pick up some Bible when everybody comes back. So we won't miss a beat, okay? We're just going to flood you with a lot of history this week. So what is women's suffrage? And that's what we're talking about today. Civil rights, women's suffrage, still in the 1920s, okay? Women's suffrage is the right of women to vote and to hold an elected office, okay? Remember, they could vote, like places in like Wyoming, Montana allowed them to vote in local elections back in the 1800s, but nationally they could not vote in presidential elections, things of that nature at this time, okay? So when did they get this right to vote? You may think that women always had that right to vote, but this is far from true. Up until the 1900s, most democracies throughout history only allowed men to vote. This included the democracies of ancient Greece, the Roman Republic, and early democracy in Britain and the United States. So this was not just the United States. This dates back to the beginning of time, right on up through the 1920 worldwide. So in the United States, women were not allowed to vote until the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. That's less than 100 years ago. Well, not now, but when this was wrote, it was. It's been 101 years now. In some countries, the date was much later, such as in Kuwait, where women weren't given the right to vote until 2005. In other countries, the date was earlier, as in New Zealand, when pioneer women suffrage in 1893. So they were ahead of the game. The history of women's suffrage in the United States, gaining equal rights for women, included the right to vote in the United States, was a long and slow process. The real fight for women's suffrage came out of the anti-slavery movement by the abolitionists in 1840s and 1850s. And these people felt that not only should slavery come to an end, but that all people should be treated equal regardless of race or gender, okay? The first women's rights convention was held in Scenic Falls, New York in 1848. So the first one was held in 1848. This is basically a women's rights convention movement started, okay? But think about it, 1848 to 1920. So this was not an overnight thing, okay? This took a long time. Around 300 people attended the meeting, which was led by Miss Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. The main outcome of the meeting was the Declaration of Sentiments, a document similar to the Declaration of Independence. It stated that women should have equal rights to men, including the right to vote. Okay? In 1869, women leaders, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, you're starting to hear that name a lot, formed the National Women's Suffrage Association. And the main goal of this group was set to get an amendment passed that would allow women to vote. And they wanted the 15th Amendment to include that right for women to vote, as well as people of any race. However, the 15th Amendment passed in 1870, allowing all men, regardless of race, to vote, but not women. Remember in our previous studies during Reconstruction, the freedmen was given the right to vote, but women, didn't matter what color, they had nothing to do with color. It was the fact that they were female. They still were not given the right to vote, okay? Another women's suffrage group was formed in 1869 called the American Women's Suffrage Association. The leaders of this group included Lucy Stone, Julia Ward Howe, and Henry Blackwell. The two groups disagreed on whether to support the 15th Amendment without the right for women to vote, okay? In 1894, the two groups merged under the leadership of Susan B. Anthony and became the National American Women's Suffrage Association. And their main goal was to get the 19th Amendment passed, okay? So gaining the right to vote in states. And although women did not have the right to vote from the federal government, they did begin to make some progress in certain states and territories. In 1869, the Wyoming Territory granted the right to vote to women. Later in 1890, women only agreed to join the Union as a state. Wyoming only agreed to join the Union as a state if women would be allowed to vote. But remember, these were pioneer women, and they were working alongside their husbands, farming, ranching, fighting, people trying to steal their goods, whatever it took to survive. So they had a little bit more of a say-so than a woman that was, let's say, in Boston, one of the bigger cities. So they were held a little bit more in high regards, if you would, by the men in that territory because of the work that they were doing. In 1893, Colorado became the first state to adopt an amendment that granted women voting rights. Okay, 1893, Colorado becomes the first state to adopt an amendment that grants women the voting rights. Soon, other western states followed, including Utah and Idaho in 1896 and Washington State in 1910. More and more states begins to make amendments to their constitutions, and the momentum for the passage of the 19th Amendment starts to grow in the early 1900s, okay? But again, this is allowing them to vote in local state elections, okay? Still not allowed to vote in federal elections, okay? The 19th Amendment, in 1917, the National Woman's Party was formed to help fight for women's rights. Leaders such as Alice Paul and Lucy Burns organized protests in Washington. At the time, President Woodrow Wilson was against the 19th Amendment. Alice Paul was arrested and sent to jail where she held a hunger strike. Okay, so Alice Paul actually goes on a hunger strike when she's in jail. In 1918, President Wilson changed his mind and decided to support the amendment. And on August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment was signed into law. And the 19th Amendment just simply says, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any states on account of sex. Now, before all you start giggling and all that because of the S word right there, this is the 1920s. This was, sex used to be male or female. It was not, the term gender had not actually been used at this point in time. This was on all the legal documents and all this stuff. So that's what that means, okay? All right, guys. You will find your homework questions and this handout under your classwork, okay? Take your time. Do well, okay? It's 2 pages of reading. Not even if you take out the big picture there in the middle on the second page. About a page and a half, a little bit more. So take your time, look up the answers, 10 questions, do well, okay? And I will see you tomorrow.